Hey guys, what's going on? It's Mark with Spiguyver Backpacking. Today I'm coming to you from my backyard for episode number 4 of the Hammock How-To series. In this episode, we'll be talking about insulation, so stick with me. Those that are new to hammock camping come to hammock camping from various different sources. Some people are just new to camping altogether. Others have camping experience in the form of tent camping or even RV camping, and so they may have some gear that they can bring with them when they come over to hammock camping. Now, getting into hammock camping, you hear a lot of people talking about top quilts, under quilts, all the different protections that you need, the bug protection, tarps, and it can become very overwhelming. So knowing what you need and what you don't need, and whether or not you even enjoy hammock camping, is something you need to answer before you really start making those big investments into it. So if you're coming over to it from tent or RV camping and you've got sleeping bags and sleeping pads that you can use, why not get started using that? As long as you're not going out in the dead of winter, you can pretty much get away using a pad and a sleeping bag. And in some cases, depending on what type of bag you have and the temperatures that are out, you may be able to get away with just the bag in those summer type situations. So let's take a look at how you would use that. Now here I have a sleeping bag, which is absolutely something you can use in your hammock. It's just a matter of how you're going to use it that you kind of have to think about before you get out there. Now, there are two different ways you can really use it, and that's as a normal sleeping bag or as a quilt. So you would unzip the entire sleeping bag and use it over you just like you would a quilt. Downside of that is there's absolutely nothing underneath you at that point, so you're going to need a pad or something to keep the bottom side of you warm. Now there are two definite disadvantages of a sleeping bag. What makes any insulation effective is loft. So the amount of loft, how tall it is, determines how warm the insulation actually is. And so different amounts of loft are going to provide different warmth ratings. And while you're on the ground, underneath you usually have a pad or the ground. And so the way that you lose heat when you're on the ground is through conductive heat loss. Now the ground doesn't get all that cold. There isn't airflow there. And so you don't lose a whole lot of heat there unless you're on a really cold surface in the middle of winter, in which case you'd want a pad with a good R value to try and negate that. But for laying in a hammock, what happens is you lay on top of the insulation, and where it may have a couple of inches of loft, once you lay on it, it compresses down to almost nothing. You really have no insulative property underneath you. And in that case, you end up with what's called cold butt syndrome, CBS. There are ways to combat this, and that would be an underquilt or a sleeping pad of some sort underneath you. The second problem that people complain about with a sleeping bag is getting into one in the hammock. Now, actually getting into it can be a real pain in the butt, but there is a way that you can make this a little bit easier. So let's take a look at that. So with your sleeping bag, you want to lay it out. Now, I lay with my feet on the left and head on the right. So I'm going to kind of lay my sleeping bag in here about where I would lay, kind of get it laid out. Next thing I'm going to want to do is unzip it all the way. So I'm going to go ahead and unzip it. Then I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to find, okay, my butt would be about here. So that's where I want to make sure my butt sits. Kick off my flip-flops, turn around, lay down. And now I'm pretty much in position in it, and I could zip it up if I wanted to, and then make small adjustments once I'm in it. That's a whole lot easier than trying to get in it while you're laying down in your hammock. While you're laying down in your hammock, moving this stuff around, if you're not in it already, can be quite a challenge. But with it underneath you, the actual movement isn't that bad, isn't that hard. But trying to negotiate it inside the hammock can be tough. Anytime the forecast for the air temperature is to be below about 65 to 70 degrees. You're going to want something underneath you. Even if you're using a sleeping bag that's rated to 30, 20 degrees, because of the compression of the insulation underneath you, the potential for getting cold butt syndrome is greatly increased without something beneath you. So this is about the simplest solution that you can use, and this is a closed cell foam pad. This one's about 1/4 inch thick. This is called a Thin White from Gossamer Gear, and this one actually comes in a wide width specifically for hammocks. And the reason you want something wider than a normal one, when you're laying on the ground on a sleeping pad, there's nothing wrapping up around you, and so it just has to cover your touch points with the ground. But in the hammock, the body of the hammock wraps up around you, and so you need something that's going to be wider to wrap up around your shoulders and around your hips. Otherwise, those spots will get cold if there's not some sort of insulation underneath you. Even if you wrap your quilt that's on top or your sleeping bag around you, because the hammock body wraps up around you, it will compress that insulation there and give you those cold spots. So let's take a look at how you can use a sleeping pad in a hammock. Okay, so it's a little bit windy out here today, which is going to make this a little bit more difficult. But what you want to do is open up the hammock and figure out where your feet will go, where your head will lay, and kind of set this thing out about where you think you will be, at about the angle you think you'll lay at, and account for it wrapping up around you a little bit. Now, as you can see, it's a little bit difficult with the wind blowing it, but once you get it set, you can kind of figure out where you will be. Put your butt about where you think it should end up. I'll kick off my flip-flops down here. And now I can kind of get in place. And as you can see, well, it's kind of wrapped up underneath me a little bit. It's not in the best position. This shoulder is going to get cold. It's in good position over here, but because it's kind of bunched up underneath me, I'd have to make a couple of adjustments, but I can't do it with me in here, so I'll have to get out and repeat this process several times until I get it right. Now, there is a better option, and that's if you have a hammock like this that is double layer. So this is where this becomes really effective. So there are a couple different reasons to get a double layer hammock. One is so that you can supplement the strength of the fabric. If you're a heavier hanger, that's very effective. Another one is so that you can use a sleeping pad rather than an underquilt. And so the way that it works is it has one opening. This one has the opening right here. And with that, I'll take my sleeping pad and I kind of bunch mine up. I know exactly where I want it, and so I put it inside, and then once it's in here, I start to undo it. And like everything else, with the wind blowing, it does make it a little bit more difficult. But because it's in between two layers, once you get it set, you can kind of move it around a little bit. Okay, here's the edge of the hammock. My feet will be up here. My head will be back here. Shoulder up on the side. You know, now I can step away, and because I've got it between the layers, it's going to stay right where I want it. And so now I can just kind of get in. And I can move a whole lot easier because the fabric of this hammock is a whole lot easier to move on than this sleeping pad. And I can figure out, okay, well, it's under my butt, it's under my feet, it's under my shoulder. It may need to go slightly that way, but for the most part, it's good right now. And so this is a great way to use a hammock with a sleeping pad if you don't have an underquilt, and that's a double layer. Now, along the lines of the sleeping pads, there's lots of different kinds out there, and there's lots of different kinds you can use. There are self-inflating ones, there are like the semi-self-inflating ones that you have to blow up a little, and then there are true-on air mattress ones. Now, the air mattress ones don't work nearly as good as the closed cell foam or the self-inflators for this type of hammock. Now, if you get something like the Hammock, which is a 90-degree hammock, they actually require a specific type of inflatable one with the lengthwise baffles to add a little bit of rigidity to it. Now in these, if you're going to use either a self-inflator or an air mattress, you want to make sure that it is not fully inflated, otherwise it just doesn't conform correctly and doesn't feel good. Most people prefer underquilts as opposed to sleeping pads. They're more comfortable, there's less fidget factor. Usually once you get them set up the first time, after that it is simply clip them on and you're comfortable. They're warm, they're easily adjustable, and they just make camp setup easier, more enjoyable, and really you've got this great fabric that your hammock's made out of, that you selected specifically for your hammock. You want to enjoy that fabric feel rather than the sleeping pad that you're laying on. So let's take a look at an underquilt, see how that works. Okay, so what I have right here is an underquilt. This is a 3/4 length. This is actually a Hammock Gear Phoenix underquilt, 3/4 length. And what I like about this is it is down. All of my underquilts right now are down. I have had some synthetics, but the problem with synthetics is they don't pack down nearly as well as the down does. And as long as you have good storm protection, weather protection, I've found that the down, I haven't gotten the down wet. So until I do, I'm gonna stick with the down. It's lighter, it's more compressible, and it works out really well. So some of the features is along the length of it, on both sides, there is shock cord that runs through that allows you to adjust it down the length of the hammock to get underneath you where you need it. And then on the ends, it has cinch cords that cinch it up to allow you to take out any gaps that are there. Now, most reputable cottage industry hammock makers and insulation makers will have a tag somewhere on there with the temperature rating. This is a 40 degree. Anything below 40 degrees, I like to go pretty much with a full length rather than the 3/4. So these things are really easy to put on. They either come with something like a mini beaner. These have S beaners on them. They're color coded, different colors, and usually the tag is the head end. So this is my head end of my hammock down here. Simply take the S beaner, clip it on, come down to the foot end, take the S beaner, clip it on, and then position your underquilt under your hammock. Now, a lot of people will like to get a different color underquilt from what their hammock body is. And here's the reason why. These two look pretty similar next to each other, as you can see. What you don't want to do is go to sit in your hammock and not have your hammock body and sit just in your underquilt, because as you can see, those shock cords are not going to hold you up. So when you go to sit in it, make sure that you have your hammock body, then you can sit in it. Now here you can see it's adjusted to go lengthwise where it is here, but it has adjustment points on the ends so that you can actually make adjustments or loosen it to position it. And you can kind of get it a little bit differential so that if your feet are higher on this end, your head's higher on the other end, you can actually pull it so that it does that. Works really well. The cinch cord on the ends cinches up the ends to keep any drafts out. And then one of the great things about these quilts is a draft collar. So even if you don't have it perfect, so it's not completely up against the hammock body back here, you have this draft collar to take up the slack there and make up for any of the sloppiness that you've got going on. So let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and lay down in here. Now, with this hammock, this is my new dream hammock, Darien. I've only got an opening on this side, so all the adjustments I make have to be out this side of it. So I can't reach out here. Let me flip this over this way. I can't reach out this side and adjust it on my shoulder. So I want to make sure that it's high on this side before I get in, which it is, and it's covering my shoulder. Now for a 3/4 length, what I'm looking for is it to be shoulder, maybe up to head level. And I've got this one back above both of my shoulders, so my shoulders are going to stay warm. Now what you'll notice here, here's the end of the underquilt, and here are my toes. So my feet stretch quite a ways out there. In the winter, that would be horrible. In the summer, it's actually not so bad, and sometimes it's a little pleasant to get a little bit of airflow underneath parts of your body. So you can actually loosen up your underquilt, even slide it all the way to the side if you're getting a little bit too warm. But if you're a little bit cold, which I have been in the past, when I was on the Laurel Highlands hiking trail with Frozen and Gary and Meerkat, I actually got to the point where my feet were freezing and I only had this underquilt with me. So the way you combat that is use something like a sit pad. I have got 2 backpacks that use foam pads that work great for this. Let's take a look. Okay, so for my Appalachian Ultralight, I use this Z-Rest pad doubled over as a backrest. Now, it can also be used in here. It can be used as a sit pad anywhere I stop for the day, but it can also be used in here, laid out inside to cover where my feet lay. Likewise, I've got my ULA CDT, and the backrest for that is also a closed cell foam pad. Both will work exactly the same way. Just kind of get in, slide it under your feet, get your feet on it, and just move your feet to where you need them. Adjust your underquilt, and now you're in business. So now, with something like this, you can stay warm even when it's cool. Now once you get outside of the summer range of underquilts, I like to go with the full length. I don't want my feet are usually one of the spots that gets coldest the quickest, so I want to make sure that my feet are covered. And so I will use this one, and as you can see with this one, you can definitely tell the difference between the black hammock, and I've got the yellow inside, the blue outside. So it's really easy to get into this one and not sit on the underquilt, whereas you might have a little bit of trouble with the black on black. But when I get in here, once I get it adjusted up, figure out where I am, because this is a full length, I am completely covered. Head to foot, my toes are gonna stay warm. I've got the draft collar down there to make sure that it takes up for any slack that I've left in there. But this is just so much more comfortable than using a pad. The pad isn't in the way, the pad isn't crunched up underneath me, there's no creases in it. This is just luxurious comfort in an amazing hammock with amazing underquilts. So I did have someone on Facebook the other day asking me a question about attaching your underquilt. So this underquilt from Underground Quilts has like a little modified S-beaner. There's no gate on the side that goes onto my continuous ridge, or on my continuous loops. Now, if you don't have continuous loops and you've got some sort of webbing system or a bigger rope system, what you can do is actually go around and clip back onto itself, and that will hold it that way. Or you can create some sort of toggle system and go onto the toggle system. Either way will work. Now that we've covered the underquilts, let's talk about the stuff that goes on top, the insulation that keeps you warm, your top quilts. So we talked a little bit about the sleeping bag and how that can be used, you know, as an economical, you already own it, solution to top quilts. But at some point, you're probably going to want to invest in a real top quilt. Now, depending on where you live, you're going to want to take a look at the different temperature ranges and figure out where your temperature range falls, what you'll need, what type of temperatures. Will you need multiple underquilts or multiple quilt sets, which most people end up getting. They'll start with something that works for whatever season they're in, but it expands. So one of the things that you'll have to think about is when you actually need it. What type of season, what type of temperature range you'll be using it in, because a lot of the cottage makers out there don't have stock on hand, and it can take sometimes 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks to get a custom order made up. What do you think of that, Louie? That's pretty crazy, huh? Yep. So what I like to do is, if I've got a quilt that's 20 degrees or less, I want to make sure that I have a sewn foot box. So what I mean by that is, as you see on this one, this is a Bandit Underground Quilts Bandit quilt. This is a 20 degree top quilt, and it has a sewn foot box, which means it is completely sewn shut. It's got a couple of snaps up here so you can vent it a little bit, but the last 10, 12, 14 inches is sewn. The foot box, the end of it is actually sewn. There's no openings here, and it's all insulated. So this creates a warmer enclosure for your feet to go in. And for me, that just works out really well once you get 20 degrees or cooler. Now for a summer bag or a summer quilt, I like this one. This is a Ghost Pepper from local Libre Gear. This is the Operator series. It's a no frills, super lightweight option. And you can see here's the foot box of it. And it's got a drawstring at the end, so you can actually open it up. And you can use that to vent it, or it's got snaps along the end as well. You can actually open it all the way up and use it just like a blanket. So if it's really a warm night and you want to have your feet out, you want to kind of just drape it over you, you can totally open it up and use it this way. Or you can pull the cinch all the way closed, snap it together, and create a true foot box. Pretty easy to use. Where all the snaps are, it's reinforced with grosgrain inside, so you don't have any susceptibility to tearing it there. And these are all plastic buckles. They're not metal, so no worries of rust or any corrosion or anything like that. But different temperature ranges are going to require different lofts and different, really quilt styles. So like I said, 20 degree or lower, I'm going with a sewn foot box. Otherwise, I want something I can open up and vent a little bit to air it out. Now, about temperature ratings. So if your quilt is rated down to 20 degrees, you're only going to get a comfort range down to about 30 degrees. And most people find that there's about a 10 degree buffer there where you can get away with it down to its rating, but most of the time, 20 degrees is not going to be comfortable in a 20 degree quilt. 40 degrees in a 40 degree, 0 and a 0, likewise. It's about a 10 degree buffer. So if you've got a 0 degree quilt, factor in that you're probably only comfortable down to about 10 degrees. So think about that when you're buying quilts. Is it going to get down to 30 degrees and you need a 20? Or is it going to get down to 15 degrees and you might want to think about a 0 degree, because with that 10 degree buffer, sometimes, it's calling for 15 degrees, but you get up in the mountains, up in the woods, and those temperatures fluctuate a whole lot. Now there is a pretty economical option out there that a lot of people use, and that's these. So this one's an Eddie Bauer one, but there are a lot of different ones out there. There's a black diamond one, and these are what a lot of people commonly refer to as the Costco down throws. So these are down quilts that you can get at Costco, Sam's Club, Bed Bath & Beyond. A lot of places sell them, and I believe they're like $650 or $700 fill power down. Some people go ahead and they will seam rip them or stitch rip them and make vertical baffles rather than the squares here where they're sewn through. Some people will do mods to turn these into underquilts. Some people will turn these into top quilts and use them that way. But they run around 20 bucks, sometimes up to $30. Really a cheap option to get you into it and get you hanging with a little bit of insulation. Guys, that's insulation. It's what keeps you warm. Make sure you get what you need for where you're going and the temperatures that you'll be in. Keep yourself comfortable. Hey, if you're just getting into it and you're new to it, use what you've got. Don't go out and spend a bunch of money up front. Make sure this is what you want to do and what you're interested in before you drop a whole lot of money, because some of these quilts, when you get into custom quilts with a lot of down, lightweight fabrics, it starts to rack the price up pretty quick. It can get really expensive. So make sure it's something that you're going to enjoy, you're going to get out there and do before you drop all that coin. Hey guys, I hope you learned something from this one. If you've got any questions, please feel free, reach out to me. Let me know what you got. I'm here for you guys. I'll see you guys on the trail. Thanks. You ready to go inside, or are you just now starting to sleep?